for taking the time to join us in the discussion. In designing this and other webinars throughout the year, the Firki team is hoping that we can disseminate meaningful knowledge and skills that takes us closer to our goal of improving the quality of education in Indian classrooms. The webinar today focuses on what differentiated learning and teaching mean in classroom, why is differentiated learning and teaching important for teachers and learners, why knowing your learners is important for differentiated teaching, differentiation techniques and methods teachers can use in class, solutions to possible challenges that teachers could face while using differentiation techniques. Let me now introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker today is Soumen Choudhury, a dedicated and passionate ELD professional, a reflective teacher and a teacher trainer. Soumen believes that learning is more important than teaching in classroom. He has a Cambridge certificate in English language teaching to adults, also CELTA. Soumen has worked as a British Council freelance consultant and academic coordinator on various projects. He has trained teachers and master trainers across states in India, taught general and business English to corporates, college students, young learners at different levels. With him today, we also have Priya Iyer. After completing her bachelor's in business administration, Priya started her teaching career as a volunteer for British Council, Times of India, Teach India Partnership in 2011. She then worked as a master trainer with Teach India, as a consultant with Aga Khan Education Services, and has worked as a British Council freelance consultant and academic coordinator since 2014 on a range of SAS projects across India. She has a Cambridge certificate in English language teaching to adults. She has worked on large-scale teacher development projects in extremely challenging contexts in India. She speaks 6 languages, enjoys reading, cooking, and travel in her free time. Welcome both of you. We're so excited to have you for the webinar. And this brings us to the norms for today. Given the large audience that we are expecting, please keep your video and mic off to reduce stress on the bandwidth. Unmute it only when the speaker asks you to do so. Keep a pen or pencil ready, handy. You can keep typing your questions in the chat box during the session. The presenter will try and address as many of them as possible throughout the webinar. I'm also here to curate your questions and comments throughout the webinar. Do remember that learning new things is often difficult, but challenge yourself. The best way to remember something is to write or discuss with your learning with someone after the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube and Firki website soon. This brings me to the end of my introduction. Before we go ahead with the webinar at hand today, we are going to start with a quick opening activity. We'll all switch on our mics for 30 seconds and say hello in your mother tongue to the speakers and others present in the call. After this, Prerna from my team will put everyone back on mute. Okay? When I say go, we'll all say hello in our mother tongue and go.
Namaste.
Hello.
Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.
Hello.
كيف الحال؟ كيف الحال؟
Namaskaram.
Namaste.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's always so amazing to see the diversity in our audience. I hope you have an interesting evening. Over to our speakers now. Priya, Soumen, welcome to the webinar.
Okay, I'll share my presentation.
Good evening, everyone.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mansi, for introducing us, and a very warm welcome and a very good afternoon to everyone who's present here. Thank you for making the time to attend this webinar on how to work on differentiated teaching to cater to differentiated learning. This webinar is the second in the series of webinars for the learning part, which is teaching in action. And I hope most of you must have attended the last webinar, which was on using social media for learning and development. So without further delay, let me take you through the session outcomes. So as you can see, by the end of this session, you will be better able to define what differentiated teaching actually means. We'll look at why knowing your learners is so important and what does it involve. Then we'll have a look at a range of different methods and techniques of differentiation that you can use in your classroom to cater to the needs of your learners. Like with most things, when we are trying out different things, we come across problems. So we will look at common problems that could arise while using these techniques in the classroom, and we'll look at the solutions as well. Here's the overview of the session. We've already talked about defining differentiated teaching and learning using differentiation techniques and methods in the classroom, and challenges and possible solutions. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll look at the references that we have used to build this presentation for you. And lastly, we'll look at useful links that you can that you can use to gain more insight in the topic that we'll be covering today. Here's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson: "We boil at different degrees." What it simply means is that all of us are different, and hence all of us are unique as well. Differentiation is the term often given to this principle of recognizing differences in the classroom. So as teachers, when we appreciate and respect this fact, using differentiated teaching in the classroom becomes easier and more effective. Now, before I tell you what or why is differentiated teaching so important in your classrooms, can you type in your chat boxes, why do you think differentiated teaching is important for your learners in your classroom? Can you type your answers in your chat box?
Lovely. Inclusivity. One size doesn't fit everybody.
No one size fits all. Excellent.
Yeah.
Individual differences among children, versatility. Okay. Students have different styles or preferences of learning to meet everyone's needs. Excellent. All children are from different levels.
Different situations as well. Yeah.
Yes. Learners have different pace of learning. Good. To make everyone understand. Okay, Hussein has said all fingers of a hand are not equal. Wow. Excellent. These are brilliant answers. Yes. So let me show you what we have. You have almost answered all the points that are mentioned here. So let's talk about these in a little more detail. Mixed ability classes. Most of us will agree, or all of us will agree, that we all have mixed ability classes to teach. In fact, many teachers fear that teaching mixed ability classes is one of the biggest challenges that they face. But in reality, all classes are mixed ability, for the simple fact that, as some of you said, no two learners are the same, right? So there is a strong need to accept and hence plan for the variety in your classroom. The questions that we should ask ourselves are, which of my learners are more creative? Are there some who are good at speaking, or some or few who are slow at speaking or writing? Do any of them have leadership qualities? Do I have dominant learners as well in my classroom? I think the next thing to consider is, how do I make the best of this variety? It is very important to consider this, especially when you're planning for pairing and grouping. In fact, Carl Rogers, an American psychologist, has listed 3 qualities that a teacher or facilitator should have to assist the learning process. And they are: 1, empathy, seeing things from the learner's point of view; authenticity, being yourself as a teacher; and very important, acceptance of the students' ideas and opinions. Let's look at learners' levels now. When we are talking about learners' levels, it could be the comprehension levels of your learners, or it could be the language levels as well. Firstly, it is important for every teacher to understand that the intelligence in their classroom is not the same. they differ. They definitely differ. So on one hand, you might have more intelligent students who actually flourish with higher order questions, and they actually demand those questions. They like to be challenged. A few of them might also be intrinsically motivated to learn. But on the other hand, you need to boost the confidence of the lower achievers or the relatively slower learners and provide them with questions in your assessment which they will be able to answer as well. As a teacher or as teachers, we need to think about how to harness the strength of the stronger learners to help the slower ones and encourage peer and autonomous learning. Basically, we need to think of how to bridge the gap between the different levels. And if you know your levels well, it also tells you the additional support that your individual learners might need. And when we are talking about language levels, it could also mean using bilingualism in the classroom. For example, if the comprehension or retention in your class is more by using some L1, I think it is integral to do so. The last point, which is planning teaching to maximize participation by all, I think this is the core of differentiated learning. Because to achieve effective differentiation, we need to tailor our planning and teaching to enable all learners to participate and achieve with the level of challenge which is appropriate for them. Now, the key word here is appropriate. The tasks or activities that you design for your learners, they shouldn't be very easy or they shouldn't be too challenging as well. So as a teacher, I need to use different approaches, methodologies, and activities to cater to the different needs of my learners. You need to know, how do your learners participate more? Do they do that well by watching videos or listening to audios? Do they like to come to the board and answer? Do they interact and participate more when they are working in pairs or groups, or when they mingle with each other and are doing activities? I think changing interaction patterns is very integral to participation. Learners tend to share, you must have observed this in your classroom as well, that learners tend to share more when they are working in pairs and groups. And these groups could be heterogeneous. So when I say heterogeneous groups, I mean, let's say I make groups of 4. I can have one stronger learner in it, 2 at the medium level, and 1 a relatively slower learner. What happens here is the stronger learner can help the lower learners, and this can be done without any interference from the teacher, thus promoting peer learning. And as a teacher, you are the best judge to observe, understand, and reflect on what works for your learners. And this feedback will be provided to you by the learners themselves through formal and informal assessments. Or you can also get the feedback by observing their interest and participation levels in the classroom. So basically, differentiation means to cater to instructions, tailoring instructions to meet individual needs. Whether teachers differentiate content, process, products, or the learning environment, the use of ongoing assessment and flexible grouping makes this a successful approach to instruction. Or in its simplest form, as we said, differentiation can involve making tasks either simpler or more challenging, basically depending on your learner's needs, right? We talked about what differentiated learning and teaching means. Let's now look at what it doesn't mean. It definitely doesn't mean grouping students based on their knowledge, intelligence, strengths, or weaknesses. You must have observed in a few classes, the stronger learners are made to sit in one row and the not so stronger ones sit in the other rows. What this does is it brings in a divide among the students, and this is definitely not healthy, right? In fact, the way they perceive things and people affects beyond the classroom as well. And this definitely does not promote inclusion. Successful collaboration happens only when the strengths of each individual are addressed and highlighted. And you will agree with me here that all learners have their strengths in one form or the other. It also doesn't mean delivering multiple lessons to the same class. So even though we are talking about mixed ability classes and different levels of the learners, it doesn't mean delivering multiple lessons. We have our syllabus to complete, right? So one needs to think about what best one can achieve while planning the lesson. How can we use the maximum of the differentiating techniques that we are going to address in a while? We talked about knowing your learners and why it is important. Priya will now walk you through what do you need to know about your learners and how can you find out about them.
Thank you, Soumen. So this is the basis of any lesson, right? Before you go into your class, in order to differentiate your lessons, you need to know your learners really well. So before we share what we have, what is it that you need to know about your learners? Can you use the chat box and let us know? What is it that you need to know about your learners in order to plan or differentiate your lessons? Some examples in the chat. Absolutely. Previous knowledge. What is their interest? Yeah, you need to know the learner's interests. Lovely. Anything else that you need to know? Very true. We already discussed learner levels. Absolutely. Their understanding. What do they enjoy learning? Very nice.
Their needs and abilities,
Their
body language, okay?
absolutely. Wow, that's a lot of options.
Yeah, their interest
Their
areas,
interest, their context, very good. The way they learn, okay,
the way they respond as well,
very
and
nice.
the atmosphere. Excellent points.
Excellent points. I think you've covered, again, like Shaumin said earlier, you've covered most of our points. So we'll quickly share what we have. So what should you know? You said most of this. So age, what is their age? What are the home languages or the L1 that they speak? So if you've to ever use something common to all, you can. Their language levels, if you're teaching a language class. Most of the others you've already covered: likes, dislikes, common interests, attitude and motivation towards learning, yes, and personality traits. So this is what on the left hand side is what you should know. How will you find out about these things is what we're going to show you here on the right hand side. Obviously you can ask your learners. That's the simplest way, right? You find out from your learners and you could interview them. You could set up interviews. You could have just by being observant in the classroom. You know, as a teacher, when you're conducting your lesson, we usually do this as teachers. We see who likes what, who's responding to what kind of questions. That's a natural tendency of a teacher to be observant in the classroom. Another thing in addition to that is keeping a reflective journal or a diary. Very, very useful, comes in extremely handy. If you have learners, and you can make, it doesn't need to be like pages and pages about a learner. It could be just brief notes in your diary. Small talk before or after class. So when you're setting up your class or when you're finishing your class, you can have very small talk conversations with your learners. Some questionnaires or some in-class surveys really help. You could also conduct student feedback, like Shaman mentioned earlier. You could just ask them for feedback after your lessons to find out what they liked, what they did not like, what they'd like to find out more about. And this another simple thing, we started off with asking. Again, you can talk to other teachers because they might have more information about a particular student. So another teacher who teaches the same class but a different subject, you can have a chat with her in the staff room. That's a very good way to find out. Basically, what we're trying to say is whatever you do, whatever means you use, try and make it very interesting. How you find out about your learners, it's extremely important you try and make it very interesting for you and for your learners. So we'll move on now. So Soumen started off with what differentiation means and why it's important. Now we're going into the classroom aspect of differentiation as to how we can actually try out these differentiation techniques or activities in the classroom. So basically, very clear, straightforward 4 ways based on content, process, products, and learning environment. It's there on your slide. I'm going to quickly read through this because each one of them will be taken up in detail in the upcoming slides. So what does the student need to learn, or how will the student get the information? That's what content is all about. What are the activities in which the student will engage in order to make sense of the content? That's what process talks about. The product is obviously the product. It's the culmination. It could be a project or anything to rehearse or to apply or to extend what they've learned in a lesson. And finally, the learning environment that you provide in the classroom, the look and the feel of your classroom. Soumen will talk you through the first two, that is the content and the process. Over to you, Soumen.
Thank you, Priya. So let's begin with differentiating content. So what it basically means is what the student needs to learn or how the student will get access to the information. When we are talking about differentiating content, it could mean the content itself or the tasks associated with it. And content can be differentiated by task, which, as you can read, it means providing a variety of tasks using a more or less challenging task than the one you already have in your course books and a more culturally appropriate task. Uh, for example, you can't use role plays for everything, can you? It's only when a conversation is involved, it becomes more sensible and appropriate. And differentiated tasks could be as varied as a gap fill or matching exercise, or it could be challenging as classifying something, debating, discussing, asking your learners to find out information, filling a survey. And it could also be creative, like poster making or making a story as well. So just to give you an example, if I have a lesson on modes of transport, I can introduce phrases for agreeing and disagreeing and ask my learners to rank the importance of the modes of transport, first individually, then in pairs, then as a group, and then as a whole class. What happens here is the learners are practicing the phrases in a very interesting and competitive manner as well. Like we talked about using social media for learning and development in the previous webinar, some interesting tasks could be commenting on a blog which the teacher has created or written, or maybe even a learner has posted. Or you could ask them to fill out a survey or questionnaire about a topic that you have taught in the classroom using any of the social media platforms. You can ask the learners also to design the questionnaire. Again, if there is a TEDx video related to the content you are teaching, you can play the video in class or ask the learners to watch it and then discuss it in class. This promotes thinking. And some of these tasks could be individual work and others could be group or pair work. We can differentiate content by text as well. When we are talking about text, we need to ask ourselves, can I bring in additional text to the classroom that complements the lesson? Can I substitute the text in the textbook or in my materials with more authentic materials like newspapers or blogs? Can I ask my learners to find out information on the internet? And is the text available as an audio or video that I can use in the classroom? We need to use graded listening or reading text and authentic materials. What I mean by graded over here is something that can be comprehended by your learners. The last one in terms of differentiating content is by media. Okay. Can you type in your chat boxes? I'm sure all of you use different media in your classrooms. Can you type in your chat boxes some of the media that you use in your classroom to cater to the needs of your learners? Okay, Kalyani has written PPT. That's what we are using right now. Google Classroom, magazines. Okay. Miro, visual aids, yes, very good. Audio, videos, YouTube Story Weaver, okay. YouTube videos, very popular. Edmodo, Priya
Edmodo.
Sethi says Edmodo. Mentimeter, Pinterest, excellent. So I can see that the last webinar has already made its mark, or probably you were already using these social media platforms. TED Talks as well, excellent. Okay, so yes, while monitoring teachers and learners in their classroom, I have actually seen how effective flashcard usage can be, and interesting as well. So flashcards, video, everything that you have put down over here, I don't need to speak more on this. So it's basically to make the classroom more creative and give a chance to your learners to think, right? And it could be project work as well. In fact, a colleague of mine and I recently used videos without sound to elicit the dialogues of what was happening in the video. And it was very effective, let me tell you that. So this focuses on the 21st century skills like creativity. In fact, poster making can bring in collaboration as well. So as you know, I mean, you have used all these different kinds of media. So different media can be used in different ways to promote these 21st century skills like thinking critically, problem solving, bringing creativity in your classrooms. And the best part is you can use these for other subjects as well, other than language. And if we are talking about language, you can use these for all aspects of teaching language like vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, writing, speaking. Okay, let's move now to differentiating process. These are activities in which the student engages in order to make sense of or master the content. Like when we spoke about differentiating content, we spoke about giving to your learners a lot of different tasks. In process, we are talking about how we can bring variety in each of those tasks. So let's look at an example. This is a nice little poem taken from the 7th standard Karnataka State English textbook by George Cooper. So let's say, as teachers, you have taught this poem in your class to your learners, and now you want to check their understanding of the poem. What kind of different tasks or activities can you think of to check their understanding? Can you please type in the chat box? I'll repeat my question. So you have already taught, or you have just taught this poem in your class to your learners, whether by reading or explaining the poem, and now you want to check their understanding of the poem. What tasks or activities can you think of to check their understanding? Worksheets, okay. Through drawing to images. Quiz, yes, very good. Zigzag activity. Relevant questions, yes. The simplest but most effective. MCQs, yes. Illustrations. Suraj Ravindran says illustrations, yes. Exchange of questions among students, okay. Rather than the teacher asking, the students ask each other questions. Excellent, brilliant idea. Questions that invoke thumbs up and thumbs down. Effective activity, I would say. Fill in the blanks. Yes. Okay, good. Very good answers. So let me show a few basic activities that I have for this poem, differentiating activities. I'll give you a few seconds to go through these 4 activities and tell me which ones do you think are easier and which ones are relatively more challenging or can be challenging for your learners. So we have activity A, B, C, and D. Joanne has written comprehension as well. Okay, very nice. D is challenging. C, uh, C is challenging or easy? Activity C is the easiest.
Somebody saying C is easiest. Activity C. Okay, D is challenging. I think that's the common one that's coming up, Shaman.
Yes. So yes, you are right. Activity D is the most challenging. And again, you're right when you say activity A and C are the easiest. Because if you see in A, you just have to, I mean, the learners just have to use a word or phrase to answer. And C is the easiest because you have multiple options and the learner just needs to select from the option. Now, when you are offering these differentiated activities or these different kind of activities, it gives you feedback about their comprehension of the text. Basically, how well the learners are able to answer the questions. It will help you reflect on the learner's understanding. So, for example, if they are able to successfully answer or do the activities A and C, but are struggling a bit with activity B, it is a clear indication that they have understood the text, but they need more practice with sentence building. Another differentiating process could be the way you conduct the activity. Are your learners doing it individually or in pairs and groups? So if you think activity D is more challenging, you can put your learners in pairs or groups and make them do the activity together so that they help each other and promote peer learning as well. There's another aspect to differentiating by process, which Priya will take you through, which is called as scaffolding.
Thank you, Soumen. Thanks. So, right, Shauman mentioned scaffolding. I think this term is quite familiar to all of you. Can you quickly give me a one-word meaning of what scaffolding means in the language classroom? Any answers here? Lovely. Hand-holding, guided, learning support, brilliant. Building blocks, providing peer support. Yes, it could be peer, it could be teacher, any kind of support. Bit by bit, I really like that, very simple. Walking with them, very nice. Superb, yeah, that's what scaffolding means. So it's a term used to describe appropriate assistance provided to students to learn what alone would have been too difficult for them to learn on their own. So exactly whatever you mentioned in the chat.
Vishwajit has also mentioned a very good point, learn from previous knowledge.
Knowledge, very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lovely. So this is, there are some strategies that you can use when you're scaffolding, when you're using this technique in the classroom. I'll quickly take you through them. So there's modeling, bridging, contextualization, schema building, text representation, and developing metacognition. Now, what do these really mean? Modeling, of course, is when you model some language. It could be language, it could be anything that what the students need to do. They need to be given a clear example of what is required of them, right? That's when you use the modeling technique. Bridging is when new concepts need to be built, like Vishwajit mentioned in the chat, and some others also mentioned, building on previous knowledge and understanding of the students and weaving in new information into their existing structures. So bridging that from what is known to what is not known. Contextualization or contextualizing means providing them some verbal or some analogy, some kind of context to kind of associate what they're learning to an existing experience. And this can be done with many things. It could be done with realia, it could be done with an illustration, an example. The next one is schema building. And these are clusters of meaning that are interconnected. So students basically need to see some connections. What you can do as teachers to use this technique is get them to preview a text, and while they're doing that, make a note of the headings, make a note of the captions, titles of charts, all of that. So this is how you're building on their schema. Text representation. This is transforming some linguistic construction that is modeled for them from one genre to the other genre. It could be done in an English class or a history class. So if you've taught them about some famous freedom fighter or a famous leader, they could then you could extend it by getting them to write on the person, or maybe they could write about if I were so and so. If I were the Prime Minister, if I were, or even in the froggies example that Soumen showed you, if I were a frog, you could get them to write a small paragraph on getting their thoughts. So putting their thoughts down into representation. That's what text representation is all about. And developing metacognition. This involves when they consciously apply the strategies while engaging in the activities. So to be aware of the strategy and which activity suits which strategy. That's what metacognition is all about. We'll move to the next one, Shaman. So differentiating by product. So this is the third in the series of differentiation. So when you come to this, this is like I told you at the beginning, it's a culmination of what the students have learned. It could be an application, it could be rehearsal or practice, or it could be an extension of what they've already learned. So culminating projects that ask the students to rehearse, apply, and extend what they've learned in a unit or a lesson. The idea is that although learners may produce different evidence of their learning, everyone achieves. Teachers can vary the ways they ask learners to demonstrate their understanding in different lessons, or they can give learners a choice of ways in one lesson. This helps you to take into account different learning preferences. Just to give you a small example, keeping in mind the same froggies activity. So once you've taught them the poem, and once they've done the set of question and answers or the comprehension questions that Shaman showed you, a way of getting them to apply or extend their learning could be either to get them to write a poem on their own, another poem, or maybe translate this poem into their L1 and write it and present it. That could be one way. Another way could be to get them to draw something from what they've understood, drawings like somebody shared in the chat. Another one could also be getting them to draw a mind map or a poster, like Shaman was saying. It brings out a lot of creativity in the students. So, same poem and all these various tasks, 4 or 5 tasks, can be used in the same classroom depending on what your students like, what they prefer, or you could use a variety of all of these as well.
You can ask them to enact as well the poem.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, they love it. Role plays are a favorite, aren't they? So these are different ways that you could use to showcase their understanding. And you could use tiered instructions. I'm going to type something in the chat box for you. It's a set of instructions that I've typed. You're going to write an email inviting your friend to your birthday party. You must say when, where, and what time the party is. You can describe the food and drink and entertainment if you want to. So this is what tiered instructions mean. So there is, if you look at must say, so you are going to write an email, so everybody has to write the email. You must say when, where, and what time the party is. So that's compulsory. I mean, they have to tell you when, where, and what time the party is in the email. You can describe the food and drink and entertainment if you want to. So that kind of becomes optional. So this way you are giving a set of staggered instructions, and students, your relatively slower ones may probably not be able to get to the last bit, which is okay, because you've said if you want to, and your stronger ones have the option of doing it. That way you're giving the same set of instructions to the class. You're not dividing the instruction saying that you are strong, this is for you, you are not so strong, so this instruction is for you. You're not discriminating like Shaman brought it up at the beginning, grouping based on their knowledge, strength, etc. You're not doing that. You are giving them a set of instructions which they have the option to pick and choose from. And we'll move on after this to the final one, that is the learning environment that you provide in the classroom. I think it's extremely important of all the four, making sure that there are places in the room to work quietly and without distraction, as well as places that invite student collaboration. I think it's really important. Some students work very well by sitting quietly and working without any distraction. Some students really like to collaborate, speak to each other, they learn more. So make sure that your class has that freedom, has that movement space, providing materials that reflect a variety of cultures and home settings. So you have a variety of content that you provide, variety of tasks that you provide. Before you start anything, whether it's independent work or any kind of work, setting out clear guidelines. So your instructions, your ICQs, your examples, everything, so that the student knows what they need to know, and it matches their needs. It's not something completely alienated. And developing routines that allow them to do something on their own when the teacher is busy. Many a times this happens to us in our class. We get busy with some kind of checking or something with one student, and it should be a routine in your class that students then pick up an additional activity sheet, or they have something up their sleeve, some game, language game, that they get into groups and play. And finally, helping students understand that some learners need to move around to learn while others do better sitting quietly. Very much linked to the first point that we mentioned here. Some of us learn by talking to others, some of us learn on our own really well. So I think respecting that is extremely important in the classroom. And finally, we when you try out all these activities, some of you, like you've already mentioned in your chat, are already trying out many of these activities in your classrooms. I'm sure you would have come across some challenges, some problems while doing so, or you might envisage some. You might foresee that you might come up with some of these. In the chat box, can you let us know of some challenges that may arise while trying to differentiate your teaching in the classroom, while using differentiated teaching techniques in the
Okay,
classroom?
Revati has pointed out that we are bound with fixed syllabus what to do. So if you remember, Revati, when I said what differentiated teaching or learning doesn't mean, it doesn't mean teaching multiple classes. So what we are saying is, within your syllabus, how can you use differentiated teaching, all the techniques that we talked about, providing different kinds of tasks or content in a different way, or using media or using text and the process, how can you bring in variety in each of the tasks? That is what you should think, and it is very important to think of this when you are planning. So I'm not delivering multiple lessons, I'm just doing my syllabus, but I'm doing it a little more creatively, keeping my students needs always at the forefront.
Absolutely. Some more interesting
Yeah, Kumara
responses?
Swami has said, can I just can you
Sure,
just
sure,
read
sure,
that?
sure.
I just
I think there are more responses, so I've lost track of that. So
Kumara Swami says, okay, what about shy students? I think the first question also he posed was something similar. So here we talked about heterogeneous grouping, right? So again, I come back to the same point, which is knowing your learners well. And Priya talked about how can we find that out in different ways and interesting ways. So first, we should know our learners well, which ones are stronger. And as I said, are there any dominant learners? Are there any shy learners? So here, the grouping or pairing that you do becomes the most integral part. So you need to try out different kinds of grouping strategies wherein you, let's say, you put the shy learner with a stronger learner and observe how, I mean, whether the shy learner is contributing or not. Another way you can do it, for example, you have asked them to discuss about something and you know for sure that the shy learner is not going to contribute. Still, to participate, you can ask the learner to take notes on what the other three are speaking about or what the others are speaking about. Here, even though the learner is not speaking, the learner is still involved and gains a little more confidence. I hope I've been able to answer your question.
absolutely. I think just quickly to add to what Shaumin said, sometimes being shy is a personality trait. And it's something which is natural. Not
Yes,
everybody is very outspoken, not
ex-
everybody is very extrovert. So I think as teachers we also need to see if they're achieving what they're supposed to achieve even if they're shy, even if they're quiet, I think it should be okay.
If I'm reading this right, Pratyay Malakar has, I mean, that's a very good question. Can you speak a little bit about differentiation in virtual classrooms? Yes, I mean, our life has
Absolutely.
become virtual nowadays, so it's very integral to talk about it. So I would say, yes, the platform is different, but the basics would remain the same. So if, for example, in a face-to-face classroom, I would have provided them with worksheets of different activities, or I would have asked them to move around and mingle with each other, which I cannot do in a virtual platform. I think there is a lot of stuff on the internet which can help you to assist you with warmers or how students can interact with each other. Like we are using the Zoom platform right now, you can put them in breakout rooms for discussion. So, I mean, the basic strategies would remain the same, but we as teachers need to think a little more and be a little more in creating the right kind of tasks for them.
Um, Thank you so much for that answer. We also have a bunch of questions from YouTube. Before we go there, there's a question about the background, virtual background. They're saying the distraction that students face when engaging virtually, especially with like a different virtual background, students keep getting distracted. What strategy would you recommend for that? This is from Rajshri Pandey.
You mean the virtual background when somebody is online, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, maybe then if it's so much of a disturbance, maybe it's the teacher's virtual background, if I've understood correctly. So maybe try and not have a virtual background, have a blurred background, maybe. And yeah, I mean, it's okay to not have a fancy virtual background because I completely understand what Rajeshri is saying. Then the focus is more on the background than what the teacher is saying. Completely agree.
Absolutely.
Mansi, before we take some more questions, can we just quickly go through this slide and finish off
Yeah.
the references?
Absolutely.
So we had some points. Yes, Priya, go ahead.
We just got carried away with all the chat
Yeah,
comments.
because they were interesting
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, very, very, very interesting ones and very relevant ones in the chat.
Yes.
So we only thought of three actually, and you've outnumbered us. We got large classes down. Most of us experience this in the Indian context, right? Having classes of 100 students, 150 students, and how do you then differentiate? And we've been talking throughout in the session about grouping, uh, using group work, using collaborative work, using instructions clearly. All that will help in your large classes, giving a clear example for your students to get them to do what you want them to do. Using materials and resources, that's also a challenge. So, how do you? I think it's also about producing materials for so many students in a large class. And then you could also have, get your students to produce some material for you. If you're using flashcards, for example, you could involve your students in producing those materials. You could recycle materials many a times. What you use in one class can be used in some other class. You could draw
Priya, you
patterns.
have frozen, or have I frozen? Mansi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we can hear both of you.
Okay.
Okay. And finally, I think this point came up, and Shaman, do you want to talk about it? Time management in the
Time management is relevant to, I mean, someone spoke about syllabus. So all we need to keep in mind is, as I said, I mean, we are not doing additional stuff. It's only, I mean, when you're planning, you need to keep in mind the different or the variety that you have in your classroom and design your lesson accordingly. So time management initially for the planning stage, probably time management could be a possible issue, but once you get used to cater to the needs of your learners, I mean, it will be easier. In fact, for large classes, I had a point, which is monitoring becomes very integral for large classes. When you have a class size of, let's say, 50 or 40 or more, what you can do is you can take a few of your stronger learners in confidence and you can encourage peer monitoring as well. So that is one of the solutions that I can think of. Yes, Priya.
Sorry, I was on mute. Absolutely agree with you, Shaman. And I think finally, while you're dealing with any of these challenges or any of these problems and trying to use a differentiated activity in the classroom, what you need to keep in mind is that you're teaching human beings, you're teaching people, right? We're interacting with them, whether it's virtual classrooms, face to face teaching, whatever. They are learners, and they have, I mean, you don't need to put them in a pigeonhole, you know. You want to show them the wider world, you want them to explore, falter, and then learn. It's part of the development, it's part of learning. So that's what we want to end this slide with, that learners, you know, they are learners, they're people. So just remember that, keep that in mind.
In fact, I'll just add one more thing. So, I mean, everyone must have heard about this book by Shiv Khera, which says you can win. And the tagline is winners are not who do different things, but do things differently. But as teachers, we are going one step ahead. And here we are talking about not just doing different things, but doing things differently as well. So we are winners and we are winners again.
Absolutely. So we're very quickly, so remember that learners are not static and have jagged profiles. They the differentiation may put them into a pigeonhole when they should be in a pasture. So just be careful of not crossing that line and, you know, going overboard with it. Just be wary as you would in any other situation. And finally, a couple of slides on our references. This is going to be up on the Firki website, so you can access these links. This is what we referred to put this presentation together. And these are some of the links for you which you can access later in your leisure time if you want to find out more about this topic and a range of other topics. There's also an interesting MOOC on the last one, the online Future Learn MOOC on the same topic that we're talking about today. You can enroll for the MOOC. And finally, before we go to the questions, if you, the next webinar in our series, which is in December, is something around taking you from teaching to writing materials. I know many of you are interested in materials writing. So Dipali Dharmaraj from the British Council has a webinar for you in December, and it's about, it'll focus on how to structure your content, how to evaluate resources, and how to develop your skills in instructional design. It's going to be a very interesting one, from teaching to writing materials. So keep yourselves available for that. And the floor is now open to questions, and over to you, Mansi.
In fact, just to add to the answer that we gave about someone's question on shy learners, in fact, this is not my answer. Suraj Ravindran has made a very interesting point to keep the dominant learners patiently with the others. He feels this is not challenging because the dominant, I didn't get it. I always feel this is not challenging the dominant learners to an advanced stage. Uh, I think I have not understood your point, Suraj.
I think I think his point is that students who need to be challenged at a more advanced level are not challenged enough. Hence, they are bored. Hence, the distraction.
Ah,
Okay,
that's a
yes,
different perspective. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Over to you, Mansi. Questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that amazing hour. It was as glued to the screen. We have a bunch of questions, as you can imagine, about distance learning. The first one is, how do you handle group work effectively? When you send people into their breakout rooms, how do you effectively manage group work?
Sure. Shaman, can I take this? And if
Yeah,
you can
please
add.
go ahead.
So I think the key in remote teaching, online teaching and group work is how do you monitor them? Because in a face-to-face classroom, it's easier, supposedly, supposedly easier. Uh, so in a breakout room, I think the key here is your instructions. First of all, make sure your instructions are clear. And when I say clear, like absolutely, I would, as a teacher, I would think I would do say those instructions to myself once and think about it, about how my learner would understand it and what would anticipate the problems that can arise because of the instructions also. So keep them very simple and clear. Have an example before you put them into breakout rooms. What we normally tend to do, even when we I've done it in the past, put them into breakout rooms and then give them the instructions. It should be the other way around. Give your instructions, simple, clear instructions, example, uh, check your instructions, do all of this. And a very good idea for online classes is to copy your instructions into the chat box. Because when the students go into the breakout rooms, you will not be in all the breakout rooms at one point. It's impossible. But the chat box is accessible to them. So they can read the instructions from the chat box. So it's always there, or get them to take a screenshot or a photo or something like that. So I think this should help. And then monitoring or even setting roles within the group. Task of somebody who's a monitor in the group, somebody who writes down whatever is being said in the group. These are strategies which will help. And of course, at the end, it's all trial and error.
Absolutely.
If there is a learner, for example, who is, tends to not participate willingly, not a shy learner. I'm not talking about a shy learner here. So you can, when you are giving your instructions, you can nominate people to, when you come back from the breakout room, those people will summarize what has been discussed in the group. So those learners will pay attention to whatever is being said during the discussion.
Absolutely, that makes sense. I also love what you said about just how roles in the group will change, given that the setting has changed to virtual. Um, we have another question about online assessments. How do you effectively assess students? What are the standards to be maintained?
Sure. Soumen, you want to go or should I?
You can go
Sure.
ahead.
Okay. Online assessments, of course, a challenge. Assessments are always tricky, aren't they? Of course, formative assessments can go on as you go along the lesson. A journal or an online journal can help you. If you have the names of your student, you can ongoingly assess them. And I think in terms of assessing them at the end of every lesson or a unit, you could make it interesting. It doesn't always need to be a worksheet. It doesn't always need to be something that it really depends, honestly, very subjective from lesson to lesson. So if you uh, want them to want to assess their speaking skills, for example, you could get them to say something about themselves or say something about the virus or the pandemic, or say something about something that's linked to their personal lives, and assess what, depending on what speaking skills you're assessing, what in speaking skills are you assessing. So it's really subjective, I feel. Really will depend on the class and vary from class to class.
And we talked about, you talked about differentiating by product. When we covered that, we talked about assessments. What we meant was assessments as well. So let's say you have just completed a lesson on freedom fighters. So instead of just asking questions or multiple choice questions or fill in the blanks or just answer in sentences, we can move one step ahead and make it more creative by asking the students to research on the internet or find out information and probably write a blog, and the others to comment on those blogs. So there could be various different things that uh, uh, that a learner can do.
There are very interesting answers in the chat as well, using tools like Padlet, Socrative,
Yes,
Kahoot to do it informally.
yes.
CCE, Comprehensive Continuous Evaluation, that always helps us. Quizzes,
Yeah.
ed puzzles, everything. Yeah, yeah. You're all pros at this now. 9 months, right? 8 months.
Someone just I just read something, virtual buddies. Yes, that's a brilliant idea, I would say.
Yeah,
So if you see that they willingly learn from each other and can help each other in learning, yes, why not? You can have virtual buddies as well.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a couple of very interesting questions
Sure.
from YouTube as well. One question is how how do you connect with students emotionally during virtual classes? Relationships have suffered in the classroom, so
Oh,
how do you build on that?
I can understand. I, as a person, I think as a teacher, I would think it's not very different in an online class or a face to face class, because if as a person, if I am somebody who likes to connect with my learners, rapport building is at the basis of any classroom, any learning, right? If I don't have a rapport with my learners, if I'm not being conscious of their needs, if I'm not making my classes interesting for them, if I'm not acknowledging their responses so many times, like if imagine, just I'm just giving you an example here, if Shauman and I were just going on and on and on about our webinar and not looking at the chat box and not answering your questions, you wouldn't like that. Here we're not even teaching you here. So imagine in a classroom, if that were to happen, your students are going to be off, right? Never going to be that emotional connect. So, acknowledging students' responses, valuing them, praising them genuinely, and not just random praise for the task that they do, and specific praise. Not that, oh, you were very good. What does good mean? What you've written is really nice. I like the use of your words. I like the use of the sentence structure. Or I really like the way you said this. Some very specific praise. All this goes a really long way in building rapport with your learners and making yours, and of course, going to your class prepared,
Yes,
knowing
in fact,
your,
I mean, just to add to, sorry,
yeah,
Priya,
yeah, yeah,
please
sure.
continue. You were saying something.
No, no,
Sorry.
no. I was just saying, knowing your subject thoroughly and being prepared builds your credibility as a teacher.
Absolutely.
So I
So,
think all this goes a long way, and kind of understanding students' problems. Sometimes a student is late, especially in online classes. There could be zillion problems, connectivity issues,
absolutely.
some issues at home. Many of them would be living in a smaller space with many people around, so they wouldn't be comfortable turning their videos on, maybe sometimes. So, genuinely understanding, I think knowing your learners comes into play really, really well here in this context. That builds your emotional connect, I feel. And Shaman, you can add.
That's exactly what my point was. This is where knowing your learners is very integral. Just to give you a very simple example, if you're teaching something about sports and the text speaks about, let's say, a particular sport, I'm not naming any sport, a particular sport, but you know that in your class most of your learners love some other sport. So as teachers, you need to think about, when we talked about differentiating content by text, can I bring in some other text which complements this lesson, which will help the students get what I want to achieve or what they want to achieve out of that lesson. But I'm personalizing in their context, something that they like, something that they can speak more about. So that is what we need to keep in our minds. And I'm sure you'll be able to build a very good rapport with your learners.
Absolutely. There's a added question around similar lines, which is how do you make sure children with special needs are included in virtual classrooms? How does inclusivity work virtually?
Very good question, and I think very important, especially when it's done online. Not all of us are equipped to deal with them very, very well. You need special training for that, I would say. But simple things that you could do is maybe talk one to one with the student before the class, before your classes start, if they would like to be provided something differently. Sometimes, having that conversation, because not everybody likes to be treated differently. They want to be treated normally, as normal as could be. So having that conversation with them before the class, ensuring, so if you have visually impaired students in the classroom, reading out your slides in addition to showing them, not assuming that everybody can read it. So reading out your slides for people who are visually impaired, uh, using different colors, using different means. I'm sure that, and again, Future Learn has an interesting course on special education needs. For those of you who are interested, you could enroll for the course and find out more.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this lovely webinar. I think we've all learned a lot. Um, for all our audience members, thank you so much for all your questions and engagement. There are some questions that have not that have remained unanswered. What we are going to do is share those questions with our speakers, and they will be shared back to you as a resource.
Absolutely.
Uh, we would now like to take this opportunity to thank Soumen and Priya for being generous with their time and expertise. I request the speakers to please also quickly share your thoughts on the webinar today.
I think we had a wonderful time. I'm sure Shaumin will agree. It was great. It was a learning experience for us, and it was a wonderful audience. Uh, of course, YouTube as well as people present here in the webinar. Extremely interactive group with very good questions, very good answers. So I hope you found this really useful. And I mean, we were really enthusiastic and it was worth our time. Thank you. Thank you. Soumen?
I totally echo your thoughts, and I would say we had a brilliant audience today because the kind of questions that they had, that itself shows, I mean, they care for their learners, and that's the reason they are asking those questions. So I wish all of you all the best, and thank you so much for making time to attend this webinar.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thank you, Firki. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Firki, as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you both of you. Our next webinar, as part of the learning part Teaching in Action, is scheduled to take place on December 11th from teaching to writing materials. So do look for Firki emails in your inbox for information on this upcoming webinar. Before you leave, please take a minute to give us feedback on your learning experience in our webinar today. This helps us grow and improve our resources for you. Also, once you fill the feedback form, you'll be receiving a attendance certificate on your registered email ID. The form will be shared in the chat window. To reach out to our speakers after the webinar, write to them at teachenglish.india@britishcouncil.org, and please follow at teach English at teach eng India on Twitter and at Teach English India on Facebook for more updates. All of these will be shared on the chat box as well. This information, please follow at Firki on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter for regular updates. Once again, you guys have been a lovely audience. You guys have been lovely speakers. Thank you so much for this amazing webinar.
Thank you for the
Thanks,
opportunity.
Mansi. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Yeah. Unless you want to continue.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.